New Tool Day Tuesday. Today's the day that I share a unique tool with you guys that I think is extremely useful, or maybe something unique, and today's tool falls under the useful category. And today's tool is a little unique because it was suggested to me by a subscriber, and he said, hey, I'd like to know how these work. If you have one, could you do a review? I didn't have one. I reached out to Banggood and I said, hey, would you provide me one so I can do a review and show my viewers how this thing operates? And they said, sure. So they sent me one free of charge, and here it is. Now let's get to the nitty gritty of the Enusic BT01 battery tester. When you open the box, you're going to find a manual, a fancy carrying case, a data cable, and the battery tester itself. I've been playing with this for a few days now, and I'm pretty pleased with how it operates. I'd like to show you some of the cool things that it can do. So we're going to put this tester to the test, and we're probably going to say the word test a whole lot, but that's okay because, well, we are doing a review on a battery tester to test batteries. This particular battery came out of a town car. I know it's a good battery, and we're going to test it out of the car. This tester will test batteries hooked up in your car, and it'll also test batteries outside of the car. You're going to see that in the menu here in a second. I expect this battery to test somewhere above 90%. See, we're going to get a result back that says the battery is 90% good, 95% good, and it's basically a state of health. I have a battery that is not so good that I'm expecting to be tested below 80%. It was in a boat, and the boat does not start very well on that battery, so I know there's some damage to the battery. We're also going to test this tester in a good vehicle with a newer battery that I know is good as well with the vehicle running, and you're going to see how this tester works. It's pretty cool. Obviously, the first step is to connect the tester to the battery, and the tester does receive its power from the battery you're testing. So you do need to make sure you attempted to charge the battery at the very least. And you see the tester comes on right away. And there's 6 options on the menu. There is a car feature, a motorcycle feature, because it'll test a car battery or a motorcycle battery. There's a waveform feature, which will test voltage over time. It's kind of like an oscilloscope in a way. There is a review, which will show you all the data on the current battery that you just tested. There is a print feature, which is really handy if you want to hand a sheet to your customer to explain to them the problems with their battery. And then the setup, it's not really worth mentioning. It just basically gives you standard features such as screen brightness, beeping, those types of things, also language. We're going to select car because we're checking a car battery. And now we're going to tell it that it's out of the vehicle. We're going to tell it that it's a regular lead acid battery, regular flooded. And we're going to check cold cranking amps. Now, other countries have different ways of checking batteries. We need CCA, which stands for cold cranking amps. And we're going to set this to 685 because that is what the cold cranking amps of this particular battery that we're testing is rated at. I'm going to press enter. It's going to test the battery, and it tells us that the state of health is 92%. That's pretty good for a 2-year-old battery that's used. It has the resistance value over here. The stated CCA was 685 amps, and what it's actually getting is 634 cold cranking amps. And then it's going to give you the volts of the battery, which is 12.57. So we know the battery is good with this meter. It is really that simple to check a battery out. Now let's check a battery that has an issue. This particular battery I know is bad. It's out of my boat. It's obviously about 4 years old. I do label my batteries so I can remember how old they are. It is pretty saggy as far as voltage, and it barely starts the boat. It's set through the winter with a low state of charge, and that's probably what killed it prematurely. However, 4 years on a battery anymore isn't that bad. It's not that great, but it's fairly acceptable. Let's put the meter on it so I can show you what a bad battery looks like. We are going to select car, out of the vehicle, regular flooded. We know the cold cranking amps on the label. It is 730. And you can see the meter says it needs replaced. 66% for the state of health. It says to replace it right down there on the bottom. We have the resistance measurement. The stated CCAs is 730, which is what we entered. Its actual cold cranking amps is 487. And the voltage that it's sitting at is 12.57. So you can see the voltages and everything. The cranking amps is our problem right here. We're 487 cranking amps, which my boat has a Ford 302 in it. It's just not enough to crank it. The battery needs replaced. And now we're going to check the battery hooked up inside a vehicle, but we're going to do something a little different because this is a diesel vehicle. There's two batteries hooked in parallel. They're both 850 cold cranking amp. So we're going to tell the meter that we have 1700 cranking amps of battery. Now, personally, I never recommend checking a battery inside a vehicle, and that's because there's a lot of loads in today's vehicles that are going on. We have OnStar and Ford Sync, and all the computers are still active. And basically all of those loads can give you somewhat of a false reading, but this meter is capable of doing it, and basically it's going to give you a rough idea if your batteries are good or not. And I also would never suggest you check tandem batteries like I'm doing in a diesel truck and expect perfect results. Again, we're just getting a rough idea of where a problem may or may not be. So we're going to select car, and we're going to select in vehicle, and we're going to select battery test. And what this message is basically telling us is you need to get rid of what they call a surface charge. Sometimes when you test a battery that you freshly charged, it'll give you a false reading because there is what they call a surface charge. You need to drain that surface charge, and they recommend you turning your headlights on for about 10 seconds or so. I have my dome light on, and so I'm sure that's already drained any surface charge. I probably should shut that dome light off, but for the test, we're going to ignore that right now. We're doing a regular flooded battery, cold cranking amps, and the combined battery cranking amps between the two batteries is 1700. And it says the state of health is 78%, and we need to recharge this battery, which makes sense. It actually says on the bottom to charge it and retest it. That way it can give you a better reading if it is good or bad. I actually suspect that this truck would test good, and the reason that the battery is low is because I started this truck and I moved it, and it didn't really have time for the alternator to top the batteries back off. Now, some of the other test features that this meter has is actually pretty cool. It kind of goes beyond just the battery, and it'll do a cranking test and a charging test. So basically it's going to see how much your battery sags when you're cranking, and it's also going to check your alternator to see if it is putting a charge out to charge your battery. So let's go ahead and walk you through some of those. So we're going to do a cranking test, and it tells us to turn off the engine before pressing enter. So you know the engine is off. I've pressed enter, and now I'm going to start the engine. And you can see it tells us the cranking time, the maximum voltage, the minimum voltage of the battery, and it tells us that the cranking is normal. So our cranking test has passed. Now let's go ahead and do a charge test, which means we're going to have to start the vehicle. So what do I think about the Enusic BT01? Well, I actually like it. It's better than any battery tester that I have here at the house. And obviously it'll test your alternator as well, which is way better than the way I used to test them. I would put my meter on it, and well, if it was charging over 13.5 volts, I assumed the alternator was good. At least this one gives you a little better picture as to what's going on under the hood. I think it's a very powerful tool at 60 bucks. I like it. I think if you're a home DIY mechanic, this would be a good tool to keep in your toolbox. If you like these types of videos, please like and subscribe. Take a look at some of my other videos, and at the very least, you might be entertained.